Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with an updated Banish Psychic deck profile. We ended up getting a couple really cool things for this strategy as of late. Firstly, we ended up getting Called by the Grave, which is very important for protecting Overdrive Teleporter, which is simultaneously the biggest combo asset for Psychics, but also the biggest liability since it requires a tribute and 2,000 life points. It's basically the worst card to get hit by Ash Forehead. On top of that, over in the States, we ended up getting Summon Sorceress, and I like to think of it more as icing on the cake for this type of strategy. You're already playing monsters of the same type, so hitting the requirement for summoning Summon Sorceress is fairly simple, and on top of that, when you link summon, much like Synchro Summon, your materials go to the graveyard, so things like �11𝗇𝑑𝖆 Cleric, Silent Psychic Wizard, and 𝗮𝗼𝗔 will all trigger, get their abilities, and basically get you extra cards as you're going for your Summon Sorceress, who of course then lets you toolbox for any other Psychic monster in your entire deck. So lots of really cool things going on here. Not a necessary component on that Summon Sorceress, but you could go ahead and take a look at the core to see where you might be able to tweak things with or without access to that Link monster quite yet. Anyway, this is going to be a let's build. As always, I'm going to go through and explain my reasonings for things, explain my card choices, and then at the very end there will be the typical alphabetical profile. But if you just want to see that, you can go ahead and click the timestamp in the description box below. I always keep that table of contents there for your convenience, so you can feel free to check out the different components of the core. And then if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to check out the middle portion of the video, where hopefully I do a decent job explaining my thought process. But without further ado, let's build Overdrive Banish Psychics. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to decide what we want to build our core around, and in this case we're using the Psychic Juggernaut known as Overdrive Teleporter. So this guy is a tribute monster. It actually mandates that tribute because it can't be special summoned. A bit of a shame because Metal Foes and even Banish Psychics would have a field day if you could bring this guy out through other means. But anyway, it's pretty sizable, 2112 for its attack and defense, and its effect reads that you could pay 2,000 life points to special summon exactly 2 level 3 Psychic monsters from your deck once while this card is face up on the field. And that's already really cool. You have a 2,000 plus monster that brings out 2 materials that can be used for a play, or they could just, attack themselves, and usually you're going to be able to do at least half your opponent's life through battle just by using those monsters. But the cool thing with Psychics is that a lot of the monsters you bring out, that we'll talk about in just a moment, actually float into further monsters. And so when you're making Link plays, Synchro plays, you actually keep your cards, sometimes even gain cards along the way, and that lets you put together bigger boards that can either just push for game right then and there, or put down a strong lockdown with things like Naturia Beast that will be able to hinder your opponent so that they can't effectively fight back. So this is the main reason we want to play this deck, but it's been absent recently on my channel because Called by the Grave hadn't been printed yet. This card is a must run in this variant because you're able to stop Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, because paying 2,000 life points on a tribute summon monster is just god-awful when you don't get any payoff in exchange for it. So definitely main deck at least the 2 copies of Called, and don't forget that this card is so flexible in you being able to stop your opponent's grave combos and all that, that it ends up being worthwhile, even if whatever happens to hand traps makes this card for whatever reason not as viable going forward. And then we have to think about, okay, so what exactly are we summoning off of it? The non-tuner side of things is going to be �11𝗇𝑑𝖆 Cleric here. This thing is our level 3 Earth Psychic with 2100 defense, no attack, but it shifts to defense to make the most out of that defense power, and that's pretty cool. But then the main reason you play this is you can send a card from your hand to the grave once per turn to target any Psychic in your graveyard and then banish it. When this card is sent from the field to the grave afterwards for any reason, through a play or dying in battle or whatever, you can go and recur that monster you banished to the field, special summon that thing, and that's really cool because this doesn't care what Psychic monster you bring back. You can bring back a Synchro boss monster. You can bring back Link monsters in the future if they get something that's not Heavy Metal Foes Electromite for Psychics, and it becomes more generically useful for this deck. So lots of potential going forward, and we just have to keep in mind then, okay, so what can we discard to take advantage of this? Obviously any Psychic, because as long as you have 1 Psychic in the grave already for the legal activation of this effect, you could feel free and discard a Psychic you'd rather summon off of this effect, discard that, target that same card you discarded, and then get that card if you'd like. Basically, our goal is to get 1 Psychic in the graveyard so we can activate its effect, and then if we can maximize utility of that discard, then better yet. So we'll think about ways to do that going forward. So that is our non-tuner. Then our tuner is 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, which is everyone, knows this hand trap nowadays, but don't forget, she's a psychic, which means we have synergy in being able to bring her back from the grave with things like Cleric and summon her out directly with Overdrive Teleporter. Plus, unlike the other Ghost Girls, her effect can activate on the field, so every time you bring her out, you can use that ability. Yeah, it's once per turn, and yes, your opponent sees it coming, but having to play around such a flexible piece of removal that can hinder your opponent's plays can be devastating, especially when it comes back for free and can be searched out so easily. So a very powerful tuner that we want to have access to. So with our primary goal in mind, we have to think of a couple things because this is a boss monster that requires a tribute. So what are we going to do in order to bring out the monster is the next step. And so the best way I found is to play Brilliant Fusion, because this lets us send a copy of 𝕮𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖘 to our graveyard, and that will allow us to summon 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝐻, and this card is awesome for a few reasons. First of all, notice that this monster being on the field is already something we could tribute right then and there for the Overdrive Teleporter, and because of 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝐻's effect giving us an extra normal summon, we can either use an additional normal summon as that tribute summon to then summon some other things and continue making plays after we use the Overdrive Teleporter, or we could bring out a monster through the normal summon and then go and sack that same monster to go and summon Overdrive Teleporter. So 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝐻 basically makes it extremely easy to bring out our Overdrive Teleporter once we've drawn it, and so it's a very, very powerful card overall. On top of that, Psychics have been fairly normal summon reliant, so that's pretty useful in getting that generic extra normal summon. It's an earth, so it synergizes with everything quite as well. Garnet's also an earth, so you can use that for things like Naturia Beast 2. But another cool thing with Brilliant Fusion is that it's able to yard a light monster directly to the graveyard. And don't forget, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit is a light monster, so it's not, now we're able to send a light psychic to the graveyard to have for 𝗿𝗔𝐺 Psychic Claret immediately and very consistently with these guys. And on top of that, I like playing just a single copy of any Psyframe gear. This is Gamma here, and I realize the reason I have this over the others is because it had a lot of utility over all the other ones in terms of just a generic hand trap. Realistically, in this build, you could play Epsilon because it has 1500 attack, I believe. That's the strongest out of all of the Psyframe gears, but rarely are you actually going to summon it to attack or anything. Whole point of having a copy of this, no driver or anything to bog down the deck, is to make it so you can send a level 2 Psychic to the graveyard off of Brilliant Fusion, since this one happens to be a light monster. And when you're able to do that, you get this neat little combo. So suppose I use Brilliant Fusion and yard Psyframe Gear Gamma, and that will allow me to go summon my 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝐻. Let's say I just tributed the 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝐻, nothing else. That's my extra normal summon, and I summon Overdrive Teleporter. I pay the 2000 life to summon out Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and a copy of 𝗿𝗔𝐺 Psychic Cleric, and now I can discard any card from my hand in order to target the Psyframe Gear Gamma in my graveyard, banish it, use the two of these guys here, level 3 plus 3, will give me a level 6, and that gives me a couple options. I could go for something like 𝗏𝗔𝐺𝒪𝒃, which is a Psychic 6, and the cool thing with this would be, if it hits the graveyard, I can go ahead and just revive it later since it's a Psychic monster. Or, what I usually do is I'll go for a Stardust Charge Warrior who gives me a draw upon summon, and that means I can replace that card I lost with Cleric, and on top of that here, I get my Gamma back. So just between these two, level 2 and 6, I could go for a generic 8. Psyframe Lord Omega is awesome because that's a Psychic, so everything annoying with Omega gets even better when you're able to bring it back in case it dies. But we now have a level 6 Synchro monster with a level 2 Tuner monster, and that lets us go for Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which is a very powerful opening play in that it's able to basically get around all of your opponent's big monsters and has the ability to negate an effect monster's effect from anywhere, could be from hand, field, or grave. Heck, I guess if something activated from the deck, you could stop that as well. It's just a very flexible card, and we're able to do this pretty much off of Overdrive Teleporter and Brilliant Fusion. So that's one of the reasons we want to play that Psyframe Gear Gamma, is that it allows plays like that to happen. Another thing we want to consider is, alright, so we brought out that teleporter, and yeah, that combo is pretty spicy, but is it really worth doing all of this? Well, we're going to actually strengthen that combo by adding some cards that help make more out of it. So the next card we're adding is 3 copies of Telekinetic Power Well. This thing is pretty much additional copies of Emergency Teleport crossed with Soul Charge. So you can't summon from the deck or hand, you only summon from your graveyard, which is a bit different. but basically it lets you special summon any number of level 2 or lower psychics from your graveyard, and then you take 300 damage times the total levels of those monsters. Since you're bringing back level 2s, you only cost 600 to pop. That's 1800 if you bring back a whopping 3 monsters. And as a quick play spell, it's more like a scapegoat than a soul charge, which is quite nice. You can use it offensively or defensively, but usually you could use it as a huge combo enabler. Remember, when we're consistently yarding 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖘 through the effect of Brilliant Fusion, we already have one of these targets in the graveyard so that we can go and make our other plays. But on top of that, if we were able to bring out another psychic monster, we'd be able to go ahead and summon 2 or more tuners. And so that's why we're maxing out on copies of 𝗮𝗚𝖃. Normally, not a good draw, but this card is one of the best that you can discard off of 𝗮𝗇𝖑 Cleric because it is a psychic that you want to use off of its effect. So 𝗮𝗚𝖃 is a level 2 Earth Tuner. That's why we can't bring her to the grave with the Brilliant Fusion and why we have to play some sort of a Psy-Frame monster in order to have access to that tuner. But 𝗮𝗚𝖃 is kind of nice in that as an Earth, you can use her for Naturia Beast, and her ability synergizes with the psychic theme. So when she's banished, and then special summon from banish for any reason, you could even Levier in this deck if you had the room and the extra, honestly. You're able to go ahead and banish the top card of your deck face down. You're allowed to look at that when your opponent's not, just like you could for Pot of Desires cards. And then, when this card is sent to the graveyard, you can't miss timing, so again, battle or any material play or whatever, you're able to go and add that card to your hand, kind of like a slow draw. But because you're using this for plays, very, very soon off its summon for a link play, a synchro play, whatever, or even a tribute summon, you're going to get that draw effect pretty much instantly. And that's really cool because that's going to go ahead and replace the card you just lost with 𝗮𝗃 Cleric, and it combos nicely into that Overdrive Teleporter scenario. Next card we're talking about, and this is very related, is Emergency Teleport. This card is at 1. It's obviously a quick play spell that lets you go and summon out any psychic that's level 3 or lower from your hand or deck. It's banished during the end phase, but no one cares because you're going to use it for a play anyway. This thing is unfortunately limited, but every time I draw it, what I find myself doing is use this thing to bring out an 𝗮𝗚𝖃, and then tribute this 𝗮𝗃 in order to go for the Overdrive Teleporter, and then you could do that same combo I showed you just now with the Overdrive Teleporter, except 𝗮𝗚𝖃 becomes the card you banish. That replaces the card you discard off of Cleric. So if you go for that Stardust Charge Warrior, you actually drew a card +1 in the process of going for your Crystal Wing. So this card becomes absolutely insane. And remember that if you get this card out, since your Brilliant Fusion is going to get you your Gamma a lot of the time, you're going to have multiple cards then for your Telekinetic Power Well. So Telekinetic Power Well pretty much in this deck ends up becoming a teleport in the worst case scenario because you end up having a level 2 in the grave all the time. And in a lot of instances, it's going to give you more than one guy, which just helps you combo even further. Because you can imagine if the Overdrive Teleporter off of one Psychic Tuner is able to do the Crystal Wing play, imagine if you had another tuner and now you can go and like summon an Omega on top of that off of the Overdrive Teleporter. Go Omega, banish a card from your opponent's hand, then go Crystal Wing. So this is a nice enabler to make our Psychics worth playing. Next, we're going to go ahead and make the deck even more consistent and kind of flesh out the core with some supporting roles. I like playing the 3 Lone Fire Blossom here for a few reasons. First of all, this adds a ton of consistency, and it becomes something that I'd rather get hit by Ash Blossom than the Overdrive Teleporter in a situation where I don't have the Called by the Grave. But this thing is very nice in that it's able to access Predaplant 𝗮𝗃 which of course lets us send a monster from our hand to grave, so send that 𝗮𝗃 or whatever to the graveyard to summon 𝗮𝗊𝖇𝖑𝖑 Cobra, and then this effect will let you go and add Brilliant Fusion from your deck to hand once per game. We're not playing anything else like Instant Fusion, mainly because there's not room in the extra deck the way I built it, but you know, you could experiment with that. That's an alternative option. Usually what I do is if I end up getting a second Brilliant Fusion, great, the plus is still appreciated because I can just discard that extra Brilliant Fusion for the 𝗮𝗃 Cleric down the line. Only one copy of Cobra here, because if you end up drawing Cobra, it's going to be a 12 to 15% chance that you open with this, depending on whether you go first or second, but it's only going to make 𝗮𝗃 dead because I will be playing some more plant cards in the engine with Lone Fire Blossom, so those cards aren't actually limited to just being useful for Scorpio, they're useful in general. But what I do want to do is make sure I play a second copy of Gem Knight Garnet. And the reason is the 12 to 15% chance of drawing your one Garnet and now making 3, 6, and then 3 Brilliant Fusions, 9 cards dead. I don't want to make a quarter of my deck dead about 10% of the time, 15% of the time, because that's just way too much. So I do play a second Garnet, especially with 𝕮𝖫𝖇𝑑 Skull Dread being a thing. You're able to kind of throw away all the traditional deck building conventions. The second Garnet you draw doesn't matter if you're able to go and shuffle that back to your deck once you resolve the Brilliant Fusion anyway. So that's going to be your safer bet. Basically, because Cobra doesn't kill as much of your deck, it only kills your Scorpios. Yeah, you could play the one copy. You could play two as well by the same logic of 𝕮𝖫𝖇𝑑, but in this deck I wanted to make a little more space for things like the Called by the Graves and such. And so that's why I played one Cobra, two Garnet. Then the plant monsters that are going to make Lone Fire Blossom even more useful include the traditional tuner monsters, so Glow Up Bulb and Spore. These are awesome. Glow Up Bulb combos nicely with Garnets and just other level 4 monsters that we'll add in order to get us Naturia Beast. It comes back for free as a plant monster of a different name, so 𝕮𝖫𝖇𝑑 plays become even easier. Spore is similar, except when you banish a level 3 plant that you have lots of, you get a level 4 tuner, and that's very good for summoning level 7s and 8s off of your clerics. And then you're also able to go and use this as like a wind monster. Sometimes that matters. In this particular build, I'm not playing 𝗵 of the World Chalice, but there were variants where I was, and in that situation, definitely having the additional wind attribute does help in this strategy. So just something extra to think about if you're considering building this. And then that also lets us play these two correctors. So these guys both give you free monsters on the field, much like the plant tuners we just looked at. And so all 4 of those are great targets for putting a tribute fodder on the board for Overdrive Teleporter, because this thing gives us Glow Up Bulb instantly. Sometimes you get a good mill off of it, which could be beneficial, and that gives us a bonus. And on top of that, you can use this to correct your graveyard. If you need access to Esper Girl and you don't have it yet, send that to the graveyard, and then you could go ahead and summon 𝗮𝑺 Psychic Cleric right there. 1-for-1 is similar, except it's able to fetch your Glow Up Bulb or Spore for 2 summons right off the bat, because it summons it and then that comes back, which is nice. And then the discard can also be used to help fix your hand and graveyard to make sure you have the proper setup for all of your plays. So I definitely love these cards. And in this last section here, we're going to talk about some tech to finish out the main, as well as the rest of the cards in the extra deck. So last Psychic card is 1 copy of Silent Psychic Wizard. This guy is pretty much a normal summon triggered level 4 1900 attack version of 𝗮𝑺 Psychic Cleric. So upon normal summon, you do the exact same thing, banish the Psychic from your grave, you don't have to discard, and then when this thing hits the graveyard, you're able to special summon that removed monster. That thing also doesn't miss timing, and you're able to make plays with it, and it'll still gain its effects, still triggers Esper Girl, still brings back big boss monsters and everything. The problems with this card in this deck, though, are 1, I want to normal summon my Lone Fire Blossoms and Overdrive Teleporters, so I don't necessarily want this all the time. If you draw Brilliant Fusion with this, though, it's still pretty solid, and that's why I do play the 1 copy. But then another problem is that it's a level 4, so I can't even summon it off of Overdrive Teleporter, and even if I could, it's not going to trigger because it needs to be normal summoned for its effect. So that's why this takes a back seat to the 𝗮𝑺 Psychic Cleric, but it's still a very powerful card. You could honestly get away playing 2 of these things if you want. I wouldn't play too much more than 1 or 2 though, just because you don't want to clog too many on normal summons when you do need those summons for your key plays. This is still something you can sneak in and it'll give you some extra attack power, but wouldn't go too far into it. And it's also level 4, so you can go Nat Beast off of the Glow Up Bulb play. Then we have a couple revivers in Monster Born and Soul Charge, fairly self-explanatory. Realize that you're able to bring back not only combo pieces, but entire Synchro and Link monsters with these cards, so it's very powerful for this type of a strategy, just like how you'd be able to bring back a Psychic Boss monster using your 𝗮𝑺 Psychic Cleric and Silent Psychic Wizard. These guys can do that as well, so very flexible cards. And then the last 2 in the main are 2 copies of Pot of Desires, which at first looks kind of weird because I'm playing Brilliant Fusion and all these other like key pieces, right? But let's be honest, I have 9 ways to access Brilliant Fusion, and if I do access that and resolve it, nothing else in my deck is really at 1 that I care about losing. Yeah, Teleport would be nice to have, but we have 3 copies of the Telekinetic Power Well. We got 3 of all of our other key cards, so you're never going to banish everything off of Desires. The +1 is very important in general, but especially in this deck because you have to recoup the loss of the Cleric every time you can, and this single-handedly does that. So basically, use the Brilliant Fusion first, then resolve this, and then go Mad Plus off of all your combos, off of the first extra card you draw with this. So that's basically why Desires is in here, and then that makes it a 40-card main deck. And then our extra deck is going to be a couple of Link 2s here. Mrs. Radiant is an Earth, so it's very easy to summon. You only need 2 Earths, so it fits perfectly with the theme. Powers up all your Earths, which is nice, and then when she dies, she either recycles herself or another Earth from your grave, which is very flexible recursion that helps make your hands, or it makes your hand healthy while you're making your combos and helps make sure you don't lose too much. So very just economical card. And then Proxy Dragon's neat in that you're protecting your board, right? So if you put something like a 𝗍𝗇𝖑𝖊𝖓𝗙𝖐 Psychic Cleric or other floater here, you can get that thing to benefit you by protecting your entire board from, you know, one-for-one pickoffs from your opponent's field by destroying that card instead. Obviously, if Proxy Dragon would also be dying, you can't destroy it instead. So if you're going to get hit by 𝗍𝗍𝖇𝖑𝖊𝗓𝗍, you can't destroy Proxy Dragon instead when he's going to die. But in a lot of other situations, simple removal can be warded off with Proxy Dragon, and then you'll be able to claim your abilities, which is a nice twist to your things. Plus, you know, when you put these guys in tandem, it's a very cheap way of bringing out 3 Link markers to the board. Then, for a Link 3, we have Summon Sorceress. So the reason I said this card is icing on the cake more than anything is that it does have the restriction that the monster you summon off of it cannot activate its effects. So the problem with that is your Cleric needs its effect to matter. But you're still able to go and bring out a Cleric or Ghost Ogre if you need a Synchro material. Esper Girl can also be used, and you can use it to tutor Esper Girl to then bring back later. So it's still a powerful combo piece. It's just that you don't necessarily want to use Overdrive Teleporter and the 2 monsters to go into this, because you kind of dead end if you do that with no other setup, because you can't make use of the monster you immediately bring out for its abilities. Still a very useful card. It's very flexible because all you need is 2 or more monsters of the same type except tokens. So hey, very easy to do with Psychics. You could even do that with a couple of Predaplants and like a Glow Up Over Spore that might have ended up in your graveyard as well. So fairly easy to do. And in a lot of situations, you're going to have some spare Psychics, or you're going to have something like a 𝗍𝗇𝖑𝖊𝗓𝗍 Psychic Cleric or Esper Girl set up with its ability, and then at that point using the cards to go into this will actually just help you extend your plays. Then you can get a free monster. You could, in theory, explore Serene Psychic Witch with this card, but I still feel even with this, Witch is way too slow of a card right now, so I'm not exploring it right now. Don't think it's really worth slowing down the whole deck just for Summon Sorceress, but I suppose there's room for experimenting with that if that's something that you'd like to do. And then the Link 4s, pretty much staples here. Borreload's obviously extremely good, but on top of that, the 𝗍𝗪𝗔 is important in here. I already mentioned how you can play the 2 Garnets because of this thing. This basically makes it so your extra copies of Brilliant Fusion aren't dead, and it's very easy to go off of that Brilliant Fusion play, because when you go for Over Scorpio, you get the Predaplant, 𝗮𝗏𝗠𝗠 Cobra, and then you end up with the Seraph Knight, plus an extra normal summon. So even with the extra normal summon, you end up with 4 cards, go for 𝗍𝗪𝗔, draw 4, put back 3, and then let's say you special summon a monster, and then you use your actual normal summon to tribute that guy, and you go for your Overdrive Teleporter, which you might have dug for using this. This basically ties everything together, and there's really no reason not to play it in this strategy. Then, for the Synchro monsters to wrap things up, at level 5, I play Beast and Librarian. So Beast is a powerful enough card to end the board on a lot of times, and you can actually make it even stronger by going for Crystal Wing with Beast minigames in those situations where you bring out, you know, just some extra Earth monsters. It does happen quite a lot. Librarian's more of a combo extender. Obviously, getting the draw is a very powerful effect. Helps you recur the loss, or recoup the loss from your 𝗍𝗪𝗓𝗍𝗓 Psychic Clerics. And then this basically is why a lot of Synchro and sometimes I guess Link-based Psychic decks work the best, is that you're able to keep drawing to replace the things you lose as part of your combo sequence, and then you can always just Synchro him off for something bigger down the line as well, because as a level 5 Synchro monster you can make him into a Crystal Wing or something like that as well. I already talked about the 6s. I will briefly talk about the the HTS 𝗍𝗪𝗔. Basically, this thing's a DD Warrior Lady. It's an Earth, so it synergizes just in general with Psychics, and it's a Psychic monster that comes back. The DD Warrior Lady effect is pretty interesting because it lets you break your opponent's boards when they can't be targeted or whatever, and then if your opponent's like, no, I want to stop you and I'm going to play a card and destroy this guy, now he's in the graveyard and he's a Psychic, so you can banish him and bring him back, and then they have to deal with it again, or you could use him as a high-level Synchro material monster that keeps coming back. So very flexible card, and I do like that. I chose this over the Psychic Nightmare just because Nightmare requires psychic monsters to summon, and that's a little harder to do when you're playing, Predaplants and plants in general and stuff. So I felt the generic 6 was more powerful and a better use of my extra deck slot, but that's not a bad card as well. It's just a huge beater that helps you see cards in your opponent's hand. Then we got these guys for 7s. Black Rose is very good in a deck that plays a ton of plant monsters, because don't forget, she has that second ability where you can banish a plant from your grave, flip one of your opponent's cards into attack position, and then that monster loses all of its attack points. So very powerful way to just end games or steal a lot of damage and potentially end a match in time. And then we have 𝕮𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖘, which is powerful because this thing is a psychic, so it'll come back. 2500 on a level 7 body is pretty strong. And then it does interfere with your opponent's link sequences because it's able to target the very specific condition of an attack position special summon monster, but every link monster fits that bill. So very useful card. You're not using its ability to recycle Gamma because you do want to use that card all the time off of your Soul Charge or Telekinetic Power Wells. It's more in here because it's just a generically useful level 7 Synchro monster. And then for 8s, I already talked about Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, that's a good one. But then 2 good generic cards are 𝕮𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙 and Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend. So like I mentioned, Omega is Omega, always is annoying, but then it's a psychic, so he can come back directly instead of just going through recycling and being resummoned. So he's even more annoying in this deck. And then Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend is basically in here because it helps you deal with established boards that you might not be able to with your other cards. It does a ton of burn damage, which is fairly relevant nowadays. And on top of that, when it destroys your special summoned Hush Psychic Clerics, Esper Girls, whatever, they can't miss timing and they get their effects, which is really nice. A nice way to swing for momentum by clearing your opponent's field, triggering all your guys, and then getting more combo plays off that potentially. So that's why these level 8s. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of one of my all-time favorite decks as much as I did putting it together for you guys. We'll start off with the main here. We have triple Esper Girl, triple Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, Glow Up Bulb, triple Hush Psychic Cleric, triple Lone Fire Blossom, triple OT, then we got 1 Darlingtonia Cobra, triple Ophrys Scorpio, 1 𝕮𝖓𝖙𝖑𝖊𝖓𝖙, but again, as I mentioned, this could be an Epsilon or whatever because it's just a 1 of, you're throwing it in the grave with Brilliant Fusion. Silent Psychic Wizard is alone, as is Spore. Then we got 2 Gemknight Garnets for monsters, and then we have for spells triple Brilliant Fusion, double Called by the Grave, 1 𝗍𝖇𝖊𝖓, 1 Foolish Burial, Monster Reborn, 1 for 1, double Pot of Desires, explains all the triples. Then we got Soul Charge, and then triple Telekinetic Power Well, which basically serves as extra copies of 𝗍𝖇𝖊𝖓. Then for our extra deck, we have Mrs. Radiant and Proxy Dragon are our Link 2s, Summon Sorceress is our lone Link 3. Then we have Borolo Dragon and Saruja Skull Dread at Link 4. Then for Synchros, we have Naturia Beast and TG Hyper Librarian at level 5, HTS 𝗍𝖑 and Stardust Charge Warrior at 6, Black Rose Dragon and 𝕮𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙 at 7. Then for 8s, we have Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, 𝕮𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙, and Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, the biggest pool for all of our big power plays. And then our 15th card is Gemknight Seraphonite for that Brilliant Fusion play. That's the end of this video, but if you'd like to see more of this series, you can click the annotation on the right, or you can see the last video I did by clicking the one on the left. If you enjoyed, I encourage you guys to leave a like and share it with others you think who may enjoy it as well. And if you'd really like to see more updates, then subscribe to JDGaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.